more income, $1,500 to a family. And over the next 10 years, doing dramatically more, both for families and the economy. That's what the Republican budget is about. It's about changing the growth gap, closing it, and giving our families a fighting chance again. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
I grant 7 minutes to a new member of the Joint Economic Committee, John Delaney from the great state of Maryland.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 7 minutes.
And may I inquire how much time remains on our side?
The gentlelady, prior to yielding the time, had 7½ minutes remaining. Gentleman's recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my friend and colleague from New York for yielding me this time. And I also want to thank my friend and colleague from Texas for his leadership on the committee. Too often, Mr. Speaker, we talk about our budget in absolute terms, and we don't talk to the American people about what budgets really are, which are choices. As we go through each line item of revenues and each line item of spending, we tend to characterize these things in very dramatic terms, as if any change, up or down, on any line of revenue or any line of spending would have catastrophic implications. And we don't have an honest dialogue with the American people about what budgets really are, which are choices and statements of priorities. Which is why, in my opinion, this Congress and the administration have failed to recognize the two dominant themes facing our country and our world right now. The first is the fundamental need to change the fiscal trajectory of this country across the long term. And the second is the need to invest in our future and our children to prepare them for a world that is fundamentally changed because of globalization and technology. And we cannot do these two things. We cannot change the fiscal trajectory of this country, and we cannot make investments in our future and our children unless we do two things. First, reform the entitlement programs in this country, and second, take actions to raise revenues. Last year, 13% of the American population was over 65. In 2030, 20% of the American population will be over 65. This singular fact dominates our whole discussion around our fiscal future. Just to put this into perspective, if we don't change the trajectory of our entitlement programs, in 10 years, they will consume 70% of our spending and literally crowd out every other priority we have as a country. And just to put this in a sharper focus, right now, as a country, if you add up all the spending at the federal, state, and local level on Americans over 65, that number is $27,000 per year. If you do the same math on Americans under 18, that number is $11,000 a year. That's a 2.5 to 1 ratio of statements of priorities that we're making in our budget. Just to be clear, I don't come here thinking we should spend less on the elderly. I don't come here thinking that we should be cutting taxes. I actually think we should be raising taxes. But we fundamentally have to change the trajectory of entitlement spending in this country if we want to invest in our future. Prior to coming to Congress, I spent 2 decades in the private sector. I started and led 2 companies that became New York Stock Exchange listed companies, and in the process created several thousand jobs. That experience taught me 2 important lessons. First, we have to look at the facts, always. And second, we have to think about the future, and we have to plan for the future. I've already talked about the facts. Now I want to talk a little bit about the future. If we want to create good jobs and reverse some of the trends that the gentleman from Texas just talked about and demonstrated to us, we have to make investments in making this country more competitive. That's the fundamental issue facing our country right now, Mr. Speaker, is to make this country more competitive. And to do that, we have to do several things. First, we have to continue to invest and reform our educational system. There's never been a stronger correlation in our country's history between having a good education and getting a job. Secondly, we need a national energy policy to ensure that we have clean and inexpensive energy across the long term. If you look at the history of successful economies, the two most important numbers are the cost of money and the cost of energy. Third, we have to reform our immigration system. And fourth, we have to invest in our infrastructure. To do these things requires investments. And we will fundamentally not be able to make these investments unless we, as I said, reform our entitlement programs and raise revenues. We're confronted with two choices in our budgets. And these are insufficient choices. The American people deserve better. On one hand, we have a choice where we don't recognize the reality of where the entitlement programs are going. And then the other choice is we slash and cut the critical investments we need to make to have a future. We can do better. Each party likes to take the high ground on a balanced approach. But what does that really mean? To me, a balanced approach means several things. First, we need additional revenues through measures like the Buffett rule and by closing certain corporate tax loopholes while also lowering corporate tax rates. The Buffett rule levels the playing field, does not raise rates, but it makes sure that there's parity in terms of taxes that are paid, and it'll do a significant amount towards closing the income inequality gap in this country, and it'll produce more revenues. That's the first thing we have to do. The second thing, we do need to reform our entitlement programs, and we should do four things. We should means test, we should raise the cap, we should change how the cost of living adjustment is calculated, and we should change the retirement age, not for people who do manual labor, but for everyone else. That's the second thing we need to do. And the third thing we need to do is we need to look at our discretionary spending and our defense spending, and we need to make these expressions of our priorities around our future. Some of that will require additions, some of that will require subtractions. These are the things we need to do to have a balanced approach. This is the choice that this Congress should have, an approach that invests in our future and changes the fundamental trajectory of our entitlement programs while taking care of those most vulnerable. That, to me, is a balanced approach. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud to be a Democrat because of our historical fight for those left behind and because of our view that we have to invest in our future. I would like my party to lead on fundamental reform to these entitlement programs and do it now so we don't have to affect current beneficiaries or people who are close to being beneficiaries. And I want to take those savings with additional tax revenues and invest it in our future, invest it in our children, invest it in making this country more competitive so that we can create jobs that have a good standard of living. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close, so I would be glad to reserve at this time. So the former chairman of the Joint Economic Committee can...
the gentleman has a right to close. The gentlelady from Texas, New York, is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democratic budget has its priorities in the right place. It puts people and jobs first. The Democratic budget makes the numbers work for everyone by taking a balanced approach that includes not only cuts, but badly needed revenue. And the Democratic budget has a vision for the future that aspires to have this country lead the world in education, energy, and innovation and quality of life. It makes investments, and that means it takes some risks, but it also is a budget that confidently proclaims we are still the country of big dreams, high ideals, and limitless opportunities for everyone who's willing to work hard, play by the rules, and do their fair share. I support the Democratic budget. I thank the gentleman for yielding to me, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. Her time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I want to thank former chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, Congresswoman Maloney, for her leadership, and continue to enjoy working with you on these economic issues. You know, tonight we've talked a lot about the growth gap and about the potential, the prospect that America's future could be much dimmer. The truth is, fiscal challenges facing our nation are great, but they're not insurmountable. If we're willing to take the necessary steps, if we're willing to be less popular, if we're willing to do the right thing. As I said in my opening statement, the single most important thing we can do for families, get this in for America to start paying its bills as a government, is to take the restrictor plate off our economy. This recovery is substandard, the weakest since World War II. The growth gap is large and growing. Private sector jobs gap is large and growing. The gap in personal income for families is large and growing. we're adding more people to food stamps than we are getting jobs since the bottom of this recession. That's no way to build a strong middle class. It's a formula for making people more dependent on the federal government. And that may be some people's vision of America's future, but not ours. And so if we are to change the future economic growth of America upside, if we are to increase economic growth and jobs and income growth, we need to restore the promise of economic opportunity and optimism. That's what the Republican budget does. It shrinks the federal government where it's fat and wasteful, and it grows the economy in ways that Americans can prosper. That is why the Republican budget is pro-growth. It includes pro-growth tax reform, and it is key to a new era of American prosperity. It's a responsible, balanced budget in which I strongly support. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee do now rise. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The committee does rise.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration House Concerned Resolution 25, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereof.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration House Concurrent Resolution 25 and has come to no resolution thereon. Chair at this time would entertain any requests for 1 minute. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Collins of Georgia for yesterday and today, Mr. Engel of New York for today and the balance of the week, and Mr. Harper of Mississippi for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted.
He's here. He's right back here. Start the clock.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to address an empty House, but perhaps a few are watching C-SPAN. We've just heard a fascinating 4-hour discussion on economic policy. A fundamental part of our work here in Congress is to set the economic policy for the United States. And as we listened to that 4-hour debate and discussion, there were a lot of charts and a lot of economic theory on both sides, small government versus an active investing government, the growth of taxes or the lack thereof, a discussion about jobs and the like. I'd like to first start my discussion this evening on what we ought to be doing, that is the purpose of all of this. I hearken back to the 1930s, a period of time when the nation was in a very serious depression, unemployment was rampant, and there was a lot of pain and suffering throughout this nation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president at the time. Today we are in a somewhat better situation, but still there's a lot of pain, a lot of unemployment, and a lot of families in desperate situations. Back in the 30s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt put forth his New Deal, and he articulated at least a part of it with what I call the test. And he said, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is rather we provide enough for those who have little." That's a value statement. That's a statement about how he saw the role of government. And I agree with him. Our task here today, as we debate tomorrow and the next 2 days what the economic policy of America will be, we ought to hearken back to what Franklin D. Roosevelt said in the 1930s. The test of our progress. The test of our progress. What are we to do? Are we to follow policies that would enrich the wealthy even more? And we have one such proposal before us. It's the Ryan Republican budget, and it would slash the top tax rate from 39% to 25% and add another $250,000 of income annually to those who are making over $400,000 or over $1 million a year. I think that goes counter to what Franklin Roosevelt said. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. The remaining portion of that proposal by Mr. Ryan would put a greater burden on the working men and women and the poor, and it's done in 2 ways. One way is to remove those tax write-offs that the middle income, that the working men and women have, significantly reducing those and cutting off those programs that people without jobs depend upon, from unemployment insurance to food stamps and to other benefits that they have. So much so that their actual tax burden would rise by somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 a year. Franklin Roosevelt said, "The test of our progress, it's whether we provide enough for those who have little." So if we are to believe that our role in government is to provide, to assist, to help, to bring up those who have little, the men and women who are unemployed, the families that have lost their homes, those who are searching for a well-paying job, if that is the test of our progress, if that is our value and our purpose, then I think we better think about a different economic policy than is presented to us by the Republicans. And I'd like to spend some time discussing that this evening. First of all, there's an immediate situation in which the sequestration, which I have voted repeatedly to end, and many of my colleagues have also, the sequestration is inherent in the Republican proposal. And that sequestration will bring pink slips to 750,000 Americans in this year, the 2013 year. 750,000 Americans will lose their jobs. So if the test of our progress is to help those who have little, well, the Republican budget adds 750,000 people to those who will have very little. They will lose their job. So why would we do this? Why would we do any economic policy that would add 750,000 people to the unemployment rolls? It makes no sense if you want to grow the economy. If you want to reduce your tax revenues and increase your deficit, I suppose this is one way to do it. But it's not a very good way. And I will tell you that in my district, at Travis Air Force Base, where men and women are going to lose their jobs, where 20% of their pay will be cut. It's a very serious problem for our nation's defense, because from that Air Force base, the big C-5As and the C-17s that carry men and equipment and women across this globe to fight our wars, to protect our nation, they'll be sitting on the ground. They will not be doing their training. They will not be prepared to carry out their task in defending this nation. Why would we do that? Makes no sense to me. Whether it has to do with the test of our progress or our values or our nation's defense. Why would we want to move a policy that would set 750,000 people to the unemployment lines? Makes no sense to me at all. We also know, and I was home in my district this last weekend, and I was talking to some elderly people that attended one of my meetings, and they were talking about and asking me, is it true? Is it true that you guys are going to cut Medi-Cal, which is the Medicaid program in California? And I said, no, not us guys, but yes, there is a proposal in Congress to seriously cut Medicaid and therefore Medi-Cal. And they said, don't they understand that that's how my husband is supported in the nursing home? What are we to do if those cuts force him out of the nursing home? Well, the reality is that that could happen, because we have a budget on the floor that 435 of us will be voting on in the next couple of days that actually will reduce the Medicaid and therefore Medi-Cal in California by a third cut. And therefore, that lady who was concerned about her husband's care in the nursing home will find a problem. She and perhaps many other, not perhaps, definitely many other senior citizens are going to find their opportunity to have care in a nursing home removed. And it's a very serious issue, because who are those people that are going to see their Medi-Cal or, across this nation, Medicaid support significantly reduced by 1/3? Well, here they are. 2/3 of them are seniors and people with disabilities. We're not talking about the welfare here, welfare and all that goes with that. We're talking about seniors and men and women in this nation that have such disabilities that they cannot care for themselves. These are the people that are going to be hurt. Another 20% of them are children. Why? Why would this House vote for a budget that would harm seniors, the disabled, and children? Why would we do that? Perhaps the argument that you heard over the last 4 hours is, well, we need to deal with the deficit. Yes, we do. But do we need to deal with it in this way? That we go after seniors, we go after people with disabilities that cannot care for themselves, and children, and take it to them. And at the very same time, in the very same piece of legislation, give the super wealthy an additional extraordinarily large amount of money that the average worker in the United States would have to work 5 to 6 years to equal the tax reduction given to those who are earning $1 million. And for those that are earning $1 billion, it is add 3 or 4 more zeros to their tax reduction. Why would we do that? It makes no sense. It is not the American value. It's not what FDR said should be the test of our progress. Seniors, children, disabled. Why would we do that? And you look at that budget and you look at that proposal a little more, and what do you see? The seniors. not those who are in nursing homes without income, but seniors, the average senior. The average senior in the United States has a median annual income of $22,800. Median. Half of the seniors in this nation have an annual income of less than $22,800. Half of them have more than that. So where are we with the proposal that we'll be voting on in the next couple of days from our Republican colleagues? It is a proposal that will end the Medicare program as we know it. And all Americans who are not yet 55 years of age will never see the Medicare guarantee that is available to those Americans that are now 65 and 55 years or older. The Medicare guarantee of a health care program that has, since its inception in 1964, taken nearly all of the seniors in this nation out of poverty, when together with Social Security. Before there was Medicare in 1964, there was rampant poverty among seniors. I've said on this floor before, and I'll say it again tonight, one of the searing memories in my mind was a trip that my father took me to the county hospital in Calaveras County in the 1950s to visit my neighbor, a rancher who could no longer take care of himself. Didn't have the money, he was poor. He wound up in the county hospital. There was a ward, perhaps 20 seniors in the worst possible condition, without adequate medical care, simply lined up, bed to bed, to die. What are we doing here? What are we doing? Why would we set up a program to end one of the most important, valuable programs to every American citizen? That is the promise of Medicare, a comprehensive medical program for them to take care of their health in their senior years. Why would we end that and turn it over to the health insurance industry? Now, I was the insurance commissioner in California for 8 years, and I know the health insurance industry, and I know their number one purpose. It's profit. They continually will put profit before people, and yet the proposal that's given to us by the Republican majority is to take every American under the age of 55 and give them a voucher so that they can go to those rapacious health insurance companies and try to get an adequate health insurance policy. And the guarantees that are in the Affordable Health Care Act would be wiped out by their legislation. The guarantees of an adequate insurance program, the end of discrimination based upon age and pre-existing condition, gone, wiped out. What are they thinking? What are they thinking? Do they understand what the American senior is going through? I think not. I think not. When you consider who those seniors are, I don't understand. I do not understand. Now, there's an alternative. There's an alternative put forward by our Democrats on this side, and you've heard it discussed here in the previous 4 hours. It's an alternative that is a reflection of the basic American value of taking care of each other, of helping each other, the value of a community. A small community, perhaps, like I live in California, community of Walnut Grove, or the large community of all of us, over 300 million Americans, where we care for each other, where we test our progress by making sure that all of us are lifted up, not just the super wealthy, not just those who have everything they could possibly need. I understand they may want more, but rather to provide the basic needs of these who have nothing or little. Health care, food, shelter, clothing. That's where we're coming from. And we do it in a way that actually reduces the deficit over time, brings back into a reasonable balance the annual appropriations and the revenues of this government, does it in a way that meets the needs of this generation and future generation, does it in a way that makes the critical investments that grow the economy, rather than stifle the economy by pulling out of the economy, as our Republican colleagues would, the essential elements of economic growth. There are 5 of them. I've talked about this for more than 25 years in California and beyond. Those critical investments in present and future economic growth are simple, but they are powerful and they are absolutely necessary. They are education, research, infrastructure, manufacturing, making things here in America, and change. Those are the 5 elements. And now that we're here at the federal level, we must add to that our nation's security, defense, and others. Let me put a couple of things up here. Growing the economy. Growing the economy requires that we invest in infrastructure. This is both immediate and long-term. When we invest in infrastructure, we put people to work now. We can do this. Men and women and corporations and companies and contractors are ready to go to work. The skilled labor force is there. All they need is for this government to fund a substantial infrastructure program. And that's precisely what the Democratic budget does. It adds $50 billion now to the appropriations for this year and creates an infrastructure bank so that we can have a public-private partnership to build those infrastructure programs that have a cash flow. Sanitation projects, water projects, toll bridges, toll roads, airports. Many of the infrastructure programs that this nation desperately needs can be financed with an infrastructure bank. And for those that cannot be financed with a public-private partnership, we can and we must use our general fund revenue to build the infrastructure. For every dollar we invest in infrastructure, we immediately return to the economy $1.57. Don't take my word for it. Take Mark Zandi's word, an economist for Moody's Analytics. Nobody has debated that point. So why don't we invest in the infrastructure? When we do so, we will be safer. We'll have safer airports. Our roads will be safer. They'll be paved. And the potholes, not all will disappear, but over time we will improve our highway system. And our bridges, many of which are deemed to be insufficient, unsafe, can be repaired and be rebuilt. And in the process, we have laid the foundation for future economic growth. On the education side, it is exactly the same. On the education side, if we educate our children, if we have the best education program in the world, something very, very good will happen to this nation. First, we will be competitive. If we fail to educate our workforce, there is no way that we can be competitive. Yet, the budget being proposed by our Republican majority slashes the education programs in this nation, slashes the programs, and for those who are in college or have graduated, they would double the interest rates on student loans. What are they thinking? What are they thinking? On the other hand, our Democratic budget would actually increase funding this year for education, keeping teachers in the classroom, giving schools the opportunity to improve in the infrastructure program their facilities, and the opportunity in higher education to continue to keep students in school And for those who need additional training in the work programs, the Workforce Investment Program would be augmented, and we would be able to provide the upgrade in skills and education for those who are unemployed so that they would have a chance to get a job in a growing economy. We envision a growing economy where jobs are created. We know that this year, the difference between the budget that we're proposing and the budget that our Republican colleagues are proposing is a difference of 1.2 million jobs. The continuation of the sequestration, 750,000 jobs lost. We end that. That's 750,000 on the plus side, and with the investments in education and infrastructure, we would add another 400,000 to 500,000 jobs, 1.2 million jobs. There's a big difference here. Americans going back to work, Americans being laid off. We also know that the future economy demands that this nation become and continue to be the most aggressive, robust research nation in the world. We are today. No one, no other country, no other university in any other country can match the research that's done in the United States. It is that research that has kept this economy ahead, has kept us moving forward. Yet, here again, we see a departure in how to grow this economy, how to create jobs. Our budget, our proposal, would continue to fund the research programs and, in fact, augment them more than what is currently available in today's appropriations. On the other hand, there are slashes to the research budget. Today, farmers from my district, today, researchers at the University of California in Davis, today, the head of the Northern California Resource Conservation District organization came to my office and said, "We need your help. We need your help to deal with a very, very real problem in California." Over the years, for a variety of reasons, the aquifers, the underground water tables of California, have been contaminated with nitrates. Nitrates from the farm, nitrates from fertilizer, dairies, and the rest. There is a requirement, in fact a necessity, to reduce that contamination and, in fact, to eliminate it. However, in order to do so, fundamental research in the way in which plants take up nitrogen needs to be undertaken so that the nitrogen fertilizer that is applied to the fields matches the amount of nitrogen that the plants actually need. And that varies from soil condition to soil condition. And yet, in the budget that's been proposed by our Republican colleagues, there is a $45 million diminution, reduction, in the available research money at the University of California at Davis. Critical research needed by farmers so that they don't unnecessarily fertilize their fields, so that they accurately match the needs of their plants to the amount of fertilizer they apply, and in so doing, reduce the contamination that is a serious health problem in many, many parts of California. So which path do we go on? Do we invest in research, energy research, critical to this nation? It was, in fact, past research conducted by the United States government, the U.S. Geological Survey, and by the Department of Energy that created the knowledge and the techniques for fracking, which has opened up a vast resource to this nation, the gas resources, natural gas resources, as well as oil. Research is fundamental. Energy research, agricultural research, research in health care, research in the way in which we conduct our communication system. All of these things are fundamental. Yet, a choice will be made in the next few days which path we go on. The fourth point I wanted to make is this: manufacturing. Manufacturing matters. Manufacturing is where the middle class is. Manufacturing is where we built the great American middle class, making things, cars, refrigerators, and the more advanced things such as the high-speed trains and the like. We need to return this nation to a manufacturing nation. This is the creation of wealth. Using the research, the new products, the new technologies, the new ways in which we can make things, advanced manufacturing technology, we can rebuild the great American manufacturing sector. We lost 9 million manufacturing jobs in the last 20 to 25 years. America can't afford that. We need tax policies. We need policies that encourage manufacturing in the United States. 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we passed legislation that eliminated many of the tax breaks that corporations had to offshore jobs. We need to finish that job. The President said clearly in his State of the Union message, we need to provide tax breaks for onshoring, bringing those jobs back to America, and end the remaining tax breaks that corporations get for offshoring. In so doing, we build our economy. We help to balance the budget by bringing tax revenues back to this nation. Manufacturing matters. Billions of dollars of our tax money are spent every year on goods and services, many of which are not made in America. Why in the world we would spend our tax dollars on steel that's manufactured in China to build the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge? 43 million tons of steel. Maybe 3,000 to 6,000 jobs in China, not in the United States, American tax money spent. And it goes on and on. We need a strong make it in America, buy it in America policy so that our tax money is spent on American-made products and services, not on foreign-made. Now, if you want to spend your own money out there, fine, buy whatever you want to buy. But if you're going to spend American taxpayer money, then we should spend that money on American-made equipment. And that is precisely the policy that we're offering here in the United States as we move our infrastructure programs forward. And as we move forward with our energy development, our solar and our wind and other advanced energy systems, use our tax money to build American manufacturing once again here in our nation. So manufacturing matters, and we will make it in America when once again it is made in America. Very fundamental. So these are the things: education, infrastructure, research, manufacturing, and change. We have to be willing to change in many, many of our policies. How can we pay for this? Well, here's one novel idea. We can end those tax breaks that are given to individuals and to corporations that are no longer necessary. The oil industry over the last decade earned $1 trillion in profit. This is the big five, not all the small ones. It'd be much higher if you added the small ones. We're in the midst of an energy boom right now. Oil, natural gas. We're producing more energy, natural gas and oil than we have in the last 2-3 decades. And the oil companies are doing pretty well. Yet, they continue to receive billions of dollars a year, perhaps as much as $5 billion, $4 billion for the big five oil industry, of your tax money to support them as their profits have added up to over $1 trillion, just the big five, in the last decade. Why would we do that? Why would we continue to use our tax money to support the oil industry? They get enough at the pump from us. They don't need a tax break. Let's take that tax break, turn it around, and put it into tomorrow's energy systems, supporting the green technologies, the solar, the wind, the conservation, the programs, the electric car systems, the batteries that will power those systems in the future, as we transition our economy from where we were to where we must be in the future. Just one example of the tax breaks that are not necessary, and there are numerous other ones. Why would we give Wall Street hedge fund billionaires an additional tax break where their real income, I mean not capital gains, but their earned income is taxed at capital gains rates rather than at an income tax rate. Why would we do that? We should end those kinds of tax breaks that are not necessary for economic growth, shift that money into deficit reduction or into assisting those future industries that we need to have, or perhaps into research or education. These are all strategies for the future, and they affect my communities that I represent. The infrastructure programs are crucial to my communities. I represent 200 miles of the Sacramento River, the second most flood-prone part of this nation. The second most at-risk cities in this nation are in my district. And yet, one proposal would reduce the infrastructure money needed to upgrade the levees, to provide the protection for human life and property. Another proposal is to invest in infrastructure. One proposal is to cause layoffs and to take out those civil servants that are working in the Army Corps of Engineers and saying 20% of the time you're going to be furloughed. You're not going to work. And so the Army Corps of Engineers work necessary to design, to oversee, and to push forward the projects that I need in my district to protect my citizens will be delayed. Will be delayed through the next storm season. We pray we won't have a flood. But why should we even have to pray when our proposal on the Democratic side would fully fund those civilians in the Army Corps of Engineers that are necessary to push forward the projects to protect Sacramento, to protect Marysville, to protect Yuba City, and to provide the money, the federal share of the cost of rebuilding and upgrading those levees. And I'm not the only place in this nation that is faced with that. We saw recently Superstorm Sandy, and we know the horrible impact that that had on New Jersey, New York, and the surrounding areas. We need to rebuild. We need to put that infrastructure in place because we know there will be additional superstorms in the future. We're looking at a fundamental policy here, a fundamental question of our values as Americans. Are we going to have an investment strategy that grows the American economy and puts people back to work and protects Americans, whether they are poor, impoverished, whether they are children or seniors? Are we going to put in place policies that meet their basic needs? And for those future seniors, will they have the promise of Medicare? A question before the House of Representatives that in the next 3 days will be answered. I pray, and I work with my colleagues to see to it that we have a growth agenda, that we have an agenda of jobs, that we have an agenda to care for those who have little, and that we honor this value. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.
There's two of us that say aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for morning hour debate.
The House today began work on the Republican budget plan for